Hello there, crafty friends. It's Heather Rui here, and I'm excited to share my first project as part of the Hero Arts creative team. I will be creating 2 cards today featuring the Christmas Sentiment Strip stamp set. Before I get to the cards, I wanted to show you how the stamp set is intended to be used with this Sentiment Strips fancy die. I love sentiment stamp sets like this because of the variety. This one is holiday themed, but Hero Arts has other stamp sets that are similar but in different themes as well, that also coordinate with the same die. Since I wanted to stamp all the sentiments at once, I taped the stamp set on the door of the Misty using masking tape. I did not take off any sentiments from the sheet. I kept the sheet as is, taping it face down on the Misty door with the stamping side facing up. I placed a white A2 size panel of Deluxe smooth white cardstock in my Misty and stamped all the sentiments at once using pitch black ink. I temporarily taped the Sentiment Strips fancy die on top of the sentiments once aligned and ran it through my die cut machine. I popped them out and now I have lots of sentiment strips ready to go for my holiday cards. I did basic black stamping, but you could use colored cardstock or even do heat embossing. I like to store these in the back of the stamp pocket that holds the sentiment set. Now let's get to today's cards that will show you how to step up the sentiment stamp set. For the first card, I started by using that Sentiment Strips die and running it through my die cut machine with masking paper. This way I can mask off the sentiment that I want to highlight. I peeled back the backing of the masking paper and laid it on top of the one sentiment that I want to highlight. I am doing this because I want that sentiment to be stamped in a different color than the background. After I inked up the stamp set using Pool Party ink, I removed the masking strip and stamped the sentiments on an A2 size panel of Deluxe smooth white cardstock. Then I used Post-it notes to mask off the area where the sentiment will be stamped. I inked up that sentiment with pale tomato ink and stamped it in the open spot. I removed the sticky notes and now I have a sentiment background with one sentiment highlighted. This is a quick and easy way to create a focal point on your card. Since the stamp set is in place, let's go ahead and do the same process for the second card, but this time we will be stamping on Peony cardstock using Taffy ink. I repeated the process and masked off the sentiment I wanted to highlight. After removing the masking strip and stamping, I added the Post-it notes and then stamped the single sentiment using pitch black ink. Here's a closer look at that finished background. Now that both backgrounds have been created, let's create the images that will go on each card. For the first card, I'm using the bear from this Winter Mail Critter stamp set, and for the second card, I'm using the house from the Winter Town Cheer stamp set. I will also be using the coordinating dies for each set. I inked up the bear with intensified black ink since I will be doing some Copic coloring, and for the house image, I used pitch black ink. After stamping both of the images, I placed the coordinating dies on top and ran them through my die cut machine. So now let's go back to that first background and finish that card. I temporarily taped that Sentiment Strips die on top, but instead of cutting out the sentiments, I ran it through my die cut machine with an embossing mat. This doesn't cut, it just makes an impression. It's such a great way to add texture and dimension. Next, I trimmed down the sides of the background with my trimmer and adhered it to a note card that I created from cherry cardstock. I added 2 small strips of Paradise cardstock on either side of the background to give a finished look. Now it's time to color in the bear image. I used Copic markers and started with E31 for coloring the face and arms. I like to outline the image and then fill it in with color. I went in with a darker shade, which is E23, and just added along the edges and went back in with my E31 to blend it out. For the darkest shade, I used E25 and repeated the process and blended everything out with the E31. For the bear shirt, I used R24 and did a bit of shading with R29. For the scarf, I used B23 to color in the whole thing and went back in with BG13 to add some darker areas on every other stripe. I finished off the coloring by adding some W1 to the envelope. I like to outline the image but then go back in with my colorless blender and soften up those lines. After the image was colored, I added some foam tape behind it and adhered it on top of the highlighted sentiment. I finished it off by die cutting this older heart confetti die using gold glitter cardstock to create a heart embellishment. After adhering it to the envelope, I applied some crystal clear lacquer pen on top for added dimension and shine. Here's a closer look at the completed card. Now let's step this up even more and assemble the second card. I did some ink blending using the sun background stencil. After it was taped on in place, I ink blended Taffy ink through the stencil to create a focal point for my image. It will draw the eye in along with the highlighted sentiment. After cleaning off my stencil, I lined it back up and temporarily adhered it in place. I ran it through my die cut machine with the embossing mat that I used on the first card. This just makes an impression of the stencil pattern. It's hard to capture on camera, but it pops in real life and adds much more texture. I trimmed down the sides of the background just like the first card and adhered it to a note card created from pitch black cardstock. I cut down thin strips from the glitter cardstock and adhered them to the edges of the background. I adhered down the house image with bone tape and then added the smoke image on top. I used the sparkle clear lacquer pen to add some shine and shimmer to the image. I finished off the card with a few stars cut from the older stars confetti die and that same glitter cardstock. I applied a clear coat of the crystal clear lacquer pen on top. Here's a closer look at the finished card. I hope this video has inspired you to step up those sentiment stamp sets. Thank you so much for watching and spending some time here today.